Good afternoon. Is the audio system working properly for you? And for my videographer, thumbs up. I love to see that. Love to see that. Let's see, what was it I had planned for today? Oh, yes. Look at this crowd. I am so thrilled. I want to just welcome all of you for coming out on a day that turned out to be so beautiful. There are a lot of other things you could be doing out there. But thank you so much. I have some special acknowledgments I want to make. Special thanks. Irene Rigby helped me set this all up. She's the activities director for Clemson Downs, and we were both anxious to do things before our designated help arrived, and so we scooted chairs around and had a good time. So I always want to thank Irene. I want to thank my family, Harry, Eric, my son, who can't be here because he's in China, and it's 3 a.m. there, but he will get a video link and be able to see everything that happens today. Let me know if there's feedback if I'm too close to the mic. My oldest nephew, Jimmy, in the white shirt, who came in on the red eye from California this morning, and his younger brother, David, and he flew down from Connecticut yesterday. David's wife, Bridget, and their daughter, April, my father's great-granddaughter, couldn't come because of work and school. Back to Eric for a minute. Eric had a nice 2.5, 3-week visit with us, and had just recently with his girlfriend, Lynn, from China, and he left here just a couple of weeks before Dad died. So you can't do much better than that. It was a really nice time for them to connect. So I want to thank my family for being who they are, and I love you. And so did my father. I want to thank the Reverend Terry Bailoff, who is minister at my church, which is the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Clemson on Pendleton Road, for her spiritual support and her practical support and the help she will provide in this service. I want to thank my friend Andy Nelson, way in the back, who designed the layout for the program you were handed. My friend Lib Crockett, who helped greet you, and Boo Wilson, who helped greet you. My friend Sandra Sanderson, who couldn't be here today, but sent the peace lily that you saw on the table and that is going to be back on the refreshment table. Bill French, volunteer of all volunteers, who is handling the music for us before and after the service. And I also want to thank our many friends who have comforted us, fed us, helped us with Dad's apartment, and helped with his celebration. And the many Clemson Downs employees who have been so warm and helpful to us as we cleared out Dad's apartment. I mean, people who went way beyond the call of duty to provide help, and we appreciate that. And good neighbors like the Sens next door, who took all the mums under their care after I had bought Dad some mums for his patio. It's a really good feeling. I need to explain the picture on the front of the program. Most of you know that Dad loved golf. Well, when he was living with Harry and me while my mother was in the healthcare center, I was still working a little bit, and I had a coworker whose father always had passes to the Masters golf tournament. And this fellow and his dad would usually go, and they'd go to all, or at least opening day of the Masters, but they couldn't go. So they gave me 2 passes to opening day of the Masters, 2006. And I made Dad get up at dark 30 or whatever, and by golly, we drove down to Augusta because I thought, you can't miss this. This is one day when you don't have to go sit with my mother in the nursing home. we need an outing, and you're this close, you've got to go to opening day at the Masters. So I snapped this picture in the kitchen. You can tell he wasn't thrilled. He was never thrilled to have his picture taken. But he's holding the ticket, and when I looked at it very closely in this picture, I mean, I didn't notice it at the time, that's a $175 ticket. We got them for free. So I thought, this was one of the happiest times I had with him, so that's why I put it on the front. So otherwise, you probably are thinking, what in the world is that all about? So once again, thank you so much for coming. I also inserted in your programs the full obituary that I wrote for my father. When you're 96, a paragraph isn't going to cut it. And even 2 pages didn't cut it. But I felt as though you deserve to know more, and more than you would have known, even if Dad were still living, about him. So I decided you're going to get that along with the program. And on the back of the program, if any of you have noticed, is a little whimsy. I spotted this on Facebook about 4 or 5 days ago, and I looked at it and I thought, this is absolutely marvelous, and Dad would have enjoyed it. So I inserted it there. So I hope you will keep this. All right, enough with that sort of thing. I would like to invite my minister, Reverend Terry Bailoff, to speak and light some candles. She's lighting a brass candelabra. It has 3 candles. It belonged to my father and mother. I have no idea really where they got it. It's one of those shameful things that I've forgotten, if it was a gift to them or a yard sale item or whatever. And I have a lot more to say about my father and his Jewish heritage in a few minutes. But I thought I wanted Terry to light some candles and speak for my father and his ancestors. So, Terry.
Each of us is connected to the generations that have gone before and to those that will come after us. So we light candles of hope and renewal that rest, as Linda said, in a candelabra from the Brody family. From our ancestors, we received the foundation for how to live an ethical and meaningful life. We, in our turn, offer love and the values that will ground future generations. The following words of Unitarian Universalist minister William Henry Channing speak to the ethics of Robert Paul Brody. May we, in our turn, live their meaning. To live content with small means, to seek elegance rather than luxury, and refinement rather than fashion, to be worthy, not respectable, and wealthy, not rich, to study hard, think quietly, talk gently, act frankly, to listen to stars and birds, to babies and sages with open heart, to bear all cheerfully, do all bravely, await occasions, hurry never, to let the spiritual, unbidden, and unconscious grow up through the common. This is to be my symphony.
Thank you, Terry. This is such a happy day for me. That may sound strange, but it is. I want to read something that someone else wrote also before we get into some of perhaps the more fun elements. From From the hymnal from my church with readings at the back, I chose to honor Dad by reading a statement by Dorothy Day. It's called Commitment. It says, "People say, what is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, words, and deeds is like that. No one has a right to sit down and feel hopeless. There's too much work to do." I'm going to reverse the order of the next two items after I received some wonderful things in the mail or email from relatives. I just decided that the logic might be best if I read my remembrance first, and then the letters from friends and family. So please bear with me as I tell you some things that you probably don't know. We're told it's best to start at the beginning, but how can I describe a life of 96 years and do the man justice? Besides, I only knew him for the last 68 years. The handout you received with the program isn't adequate, but it's an attempt to describe the arc of my father's life before he moved to Clemson. Let me quote something attributed to the actor-director Woody Allen that always reminded me of my father's outlook on life. Woody Allen is supposed to have said, "Life is full of loneliness and misery and suffering and unhappiness, and it's all over much too quickly." Before I talk about his life period before he came to Clemson, though, I must tell you that the friends and Clemson Downs neighbors he knew enriched his later years. He often commented on how nice people are here. I'm not talking about just his dining companions and his Friday morning putting companions, but everyone, people who cared for my mother during the 3.5 years she lived in the healthcare center, and when he moved into an apartment. Hope Glenn's okay. The maintenance crew, I just want to say that he really appreciated the maintenance crew, the dining services folks, the CARC, that's Clemson Area Retirement Center, community, administrative staff, Dr. Bill King, the physician here, the groundskeepers, the volunteers, and members of the board of directors who listened to his concerns and ideas. He really appreciated that. I'm also talking about nice people, such as the stranger, total stranger, who overheard Dad one day at a gas station. Well, Dad always went inside to pay. He didn't like to swipe the card outside. And he went into a gas station on 123, probably the Exxon up there, and he realized he had come out without his wallet, and he had already filled the tank. Well, some stranger overheard Dad tell the clerk that he'd mistakenly come out without his wallet, and the stranger quickly gave the clerk a $20 bill to cover my dad's fill-up, and then he left right away before my dad could get his name. That's what I'm talking about, kindness, and how wonderful it was for Dad. And of course, I can't forget who I call the master of all volunteers, Bill French, Bill the Music Man. Bill and Dad had some deep discussions, philosophical ones. Of course, there was always also Bill's home hospitality, the dinner parties, and the baked goods. Dad was analytical and critical. I'm sure if anyone knew him, you knew he was critical. Most of his sentences began with the words, "The problem is," and I attribute that to his engineering mind. He was a problem solver, so he saw problems everywhere. He was not one to grant easy praise. but he often and spontaneously told me how good you all were to him and how nice people are here. That's why I'm going over that again and again. So I thank you sincerely for making Dad feel comfortable at the Downs and in Clemson. The reason he was so touched by the many kindnesses he experienced here is that he expected something quite different. For decades, I tried to persuade my parents, Mom wanted to come, but Dad didn't, to move here from Florida, and particularly the Downs. In fact, they looked at the Downs in 1980, but he resisted. Only a few years ago did he reveal the reason. He was certain he'd be subject to prejudice because he was a Jew. His fear probably comes as a shock to you. Well, let me explain. For most of his life, unless he was among other Jewish people of Jewish heritage, he experienced both random and predictable prejudice. This came in the form of jokes, casual expressions, indirect references, and unwelcoming atmospheres, blatant warnings, and so on. These cruelties weren't constant, of course, but he was never surprised when they happened. And he was never at ease unless he was with his own tribe. My mother wasn't Jewish, but she wanted to be. She thought she was, so that counted. He learned to expect people to reject him simply for being a Jew. I'm not talking about religious beliefs. I'm talking about an ethnic identity. He was brought up in a family of little means, but lots of worry. There were no family vacations. They didn't go out for dinner. My father's job was to study hard, help his father, and make a life for himself through education. That was what first-generation Jewish males were expected to do, and a lot of them did it. Although he went through the rite of passage known as a bar mitzvah, he told me that his own non-religious Jewish parents just made him do it to please the grandparents. They were religious. And you'll see over here his little book that I guess he got when he was preparing for his bar mitzvah. He never really talked about any of it, but it's a treasure that we're holding on to. No, the family wasn't religious. They were what's known colloquially as gastronomic Jews. They took sustenance of all kinds by way of food. I don't think it's a stretch to say that eating was a spiritual experience in the Brody family. That's why you'll find Dad's favorite snack, Snickers candy bars, among the refreshments when you go in the other room for lemonade and cookies. Please take one. Or two. They're little. So even though Dad followed no religious practices, I wanted to honor him and our ancestors going all the way back to ancient times by displaying the candelabra he owned, and that's why I asked Reverend Terry to light those candles for me. Now, most of you have known Dad for only a few years. Let me tell you about your friend Bob as a younger man. He was a doer, and he was in a hurry. There was, in fact, when he lived with us and he took his walks on the walking trail at Kiwi Key, he was about 90, and I couldn't keep up with him on that 2.5-mile trail. There was never enough time to get everything done that he set his mind to. He was a perfectionist and very impatient. I remember his frustration in trying to help me with math. He couldn't understand why I didn't get it. Finally, both of us threw up our hands, and my math grades reflected that. I'm sure my nephews Jimmy and David can recall their grandfather's impatience with their little boy ways and later their teenage ways. But Dad loved us all fiercely, and showed it through the way he had been loved, which was through worry and protection. And I always thought that the worry that he expressed was his saying to me, you don't have what it takes, you're inadequate. I just don't think you've got it. I don't think you're gonna make anything of yourself. Well, I was well into my 50s before I figured out that that's how he approached it, but that isn't what he was saying. He was saying, you're so potentially so good, why don't you get in gear and get something done? But anyway, all I heard was worry, protection, criticism. He loved his first child, my sister Eleanor, who is the mother of Jimmy and David. Eleanor died almost 20 years ago. He loved her sons, he loved me, he loved Harry like a son. And when Eric, Harry's and my son, came along, Dad extended that same protective impulse to him as he did when David's daughter, April, was born. I confess that for most of our lives, we didn't understand that Dad's criticism of our behavior was because he loved us so much and he knew we could try harder, do better. I, for one, was a slow learner in that department. Dad and I weren't really close. I wasn't Daddy's girl. We didn't seem to understand each other very well. There were no big family rifts about that, but we were more like ships crossing in the night. But over the decades, and especially when my mother became unable to do much for herself, and she was 6 years older than my father, and it just was highly unusual, still is. So she got, infirm before he did. At this point, he developed patience, and I matured, and something wonderful began to grow between us. Good things can come from bad things. In September 2004, 3 consecutive hurricanes hit Vero Beach, Florida, where my parents were living. And they were spending half the year there and half the year up at Cape Cod. Well, those hurricanes, they were in a shelter for 10 days. It was a nightmare, and there was no way to communicate, and it was quite astounding. This required them to relocate up here very quickly. I got my mother up here very, very quickly, and then he had to stay down there to take care of some things, but he followed and arrived on her birthday, which was November 15th. While Mom lived in the healthcare center, Dad lived with Harry and me. That's when we really became friends. We respected each other as adults. This was a huge blessing for us both and for Harry. So I have no unresolved issues as I adjust to Dad's physical absence. It was a wonderful thing that they got up here in 2004, and we came to know each other as people. And the other thing is to live so long. Both of my parents lived to 96. It's really a treat that they did, because if they had died much younger, I wouldn't have known them the way I came to know them, so I'm most thankful. Dad never expected special treatment, but he believed in fairness. He could see that despite our American ideals, the playing field is not level. When he enrolled in engineering study at Purdue University, the dean of engineering said to him, well, you can study engineering, but nobody's going to hire a Jewish engineer. He persevered. He believed that we are here to help each other in material ways, as well as to promote justice, legally, environmentally, and internationally. He understood that children are not responsible for the circumstances of the families they're born into. That's why he supported organizations such as the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Holocaust Memorial Museum, Habitat for Humanity, Goodwill Industries, the Special Olympics, and others. And I didn't know half of this until I went through his stuff. He was a quiet person. He was proud that I volunteer at the Clemson Child Development Center. He came with me one time, and I so enjoyed how his face lit up when all the little 4-year-olds talked to him. He believed that everybody, the culture and the economy, benefits when children get a good start. Your gifts in his memory, if you choose to make any, will go to scholarships. I and the school, I know, extend thanks to you. I thank you for listening to my remembrance. And I would like to read some things that have come from relatives. And then it's open the floor, and I know some of you wish to say something. No one should feel under any pressure, but if the spirit moves you, you hop on up here. First, I'm going to read something Harry wrote, because it's easier for me to do it than for him, okay? Dad. Now, we each called each other's parents Dad and Mom. We didn't let them tell us to say, oh, call me Gladys, call me Allison, call me Bob, call me Ernie. No, we just decided it was easy if we just called them both Mom and Dad. Harry says, in a word, Bob Brody, I called him Dad, was a mensch. A mensch, as many of you know, is a Yiddish word meaning someone to admire and emulate, someone of noble character, a person who has a sense of what is right, one who is responsible. Memories of Dad. In past years, when we were both younger, we would hike up Table Rock Mountain. Dad was in great shape, and we always reached the top. During those hikes and other long walks together, we had long and far-reaching discussions about many topics. I always appreciated his take on politics, his childhood, and his many and varied life experiences. I feel that I got to know him better, and I grew to appreciate his opinions and life story. Dad always worked very hard, whether it was holding 2 jobs in the early days of his marriage to Allison, or by diving into extensive house maintenance tasks. After returning home from a full day's work at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft, he always had a project going on. He was born, as you know, in 1917 to poor, hardworking immigrants. They lived in Hartford, Connecticut on an upper floor of what we would probably think of as a tenement. And I have very few pictures of that period, but I have a picture of the house and a few pictures, little itty-bitty pictures of my dad as a little boy. One story I remember was that during Prohibition, a neighbor on another floor made liquor of some kind. Dad was just a boy, but he earned money delivering liquor to eager customers. He just told us that a few years ago. I don't think he earned a merit badge for that. Although we should probably check his Eagle Scout sash that is on display. I don't think there's one there for being a rum runner. He didn't even drink. Hardly ever. Bob showed his love not so much by vocalizing or hugs, but by caring for people and suggesting ways for them to solve their problems. Right, nephews? Suggesting ways. One of his sayings that I never really got used to when I was younger and newly married to his daughter, Linda, was, the problem is. So again, the problem is. And then he would just go on to outline the problem and a solution. Sometimes he would just take over. This was hard to swallow for a young man bent on maintaining his independence. It was only in later years that I really understood that this was how he expressed his love. For example, when I met Linda on a double-blind date, a story for another day, maybe for my memorial service, I, Harry, was working at United Aircraft Research Labs. After we were married, I was taking evening classes at the University of Connecticut with the goal of eventually earning my PhD, resigning from the research labs and embarking on an academic career. Dad was skeptical about this and wanted me to meet and talk with one of his colleagues at Pratt & Whitney, who had a PhD and who had a dim view of college professors he had employed as consultants to Pratt & Whitney. This was typical of Dad's expressing his love and concern. Well, I met the gentleman and had a long discussion with him. However, I subsequently decided to continue my pursuit of an academic career. Dad wanted me to have all the information available and be well informed before making my final decision. I don't think I fully appreciated that at the time. Outside of work, he was never afraid to tackle any kind of house maintenance job, applying his engineering knowledge and practical skills to the job. 99% of the time, he succeeded. However, at their house on Cape Cod, Dad and Mom had hung bird feeders from various trees in the yard. Inevitably, this resulted in ongoing wars with what? Squirrels that were sure that the bird food was meant for them. After trying various schemes to foil the critters, and after buying a squirrel-proof feeder that did not work, Dad decided an innovative engineering solution was called for. He wrapped bare copper wire around one of the tree trunks, and as a squirrel started to climb up the tree to get to the feeder, Dad plugged the other end into an electric socket. According to Dad, the tree caught fire, but the squirrel escaped. This event was one of the few times his efforts did not meet with success. As the years passed and I got to know and better understand Dad, my admiration, respect, and love for him grew. From extremely modest beginnings through his own hard work and efforts, and despite encountering prejudice in some quarters, he accomplished many things and led a very full life. Yes, Bob Brody was truly a mensch in the fullest sense of the word. I loved him, admired him, and I'll miss him greatly. That's Harry. I have a few more to read if you can put up with this. From David's wife, Bridget, who couldn't be here. She's up in Connecticut. She said, "Dear Linda, I wanted to share with you some of my memories of your father. When I was first introduced to the Brody family in 1979, it was such a warm and loving experience for me. My family was so detached. I never really knew my grandparents or anything about their history. Meeting Bob and Allison," my mother's name was Allison, "was quite a treat for me, and they welcomed me with much love and respect. One of my first meetings with your dad turned out to be a job interview. I remember sitting on the couch at Wapley Road, that's where we lived at the time, and he started asking me questions about myself, my family, and what kind of chores I knew how to do. I explained to him that my parents taught me how to work, and I had lots of practice. Next thing I knew, I had a job on the weekends as an aide and companion taking care of his mother, our beloved Bubby. That's what you call grandmother in Yiddish. I never met a man who loved his mother the way Grandpa did. The stories he would tell of her growing up in the old country and immigrating to the States were so very interesting to me, and I loved hearing the history of his family. His own journey in life was inspiring, and I had much love and respect for him. I even spent my honeymoon in the house next door to the Cape House, thinking nothing of it except that I was surrounded by people who loved and cared for me. The days at the Cape are such a precious memory for me. Bob would have the rowboat all ready for us, and the minnow trap would be full. I ate my first lobster there, fresh from Nickerson's Fish Market in Chatham. I remember how he loved picking blueberries at Rose's farm in South Glastonbury, Connecticut, and every time I make blueberry muffins, he is with me. When April was born, that's David and Bridget's daughter, they drove from the Cape to Connecticut to meet her, their first great-grandchild, in fact, their only so far, their first great-grandchild, and they adored her. I'm so glad she got the opportunity to know and spend time with them. She realizes how blessed she is to have had them in her life. As she grew, we visited with them as often as we could, bringing her to the Cape and later to Florida. He couldn't wait to take her to, on the Cape, a place called the Sunday School, which is spelled S-U-N-D-A-E, for ice cream. She christened his back seat on the way home. Bob was always thinking of others and would call out of the blue with an idea or a suggestion, usually job-related, sometimes sending newspaper articles he thought I'd find helpful. He had a healthy respect for money, and he wanted us to work hard, which we always did. Excuse me. One night, Dave and I were out driving around Glastonbury, and our truck broke down. We walked to Bob's and borrowed money for a tow. Being young and not thinking, we forgot about the loan. 20-plus years later, Allison gently reminded us that the loan was still outstanding. Bob wanted us to understand the lesson here. It wasn't about the money. Lesson learned. When I was asked to fly to Detroit on business, Bob was there for me, offering tips and support because he knew how terrified I was to go alone. He gave me strength and courage when I needed it most. The most heartbreaking time for me was when Eleanor died. Bob was just lost. His sorrow was overwhelming and very difficult to witness. The circumstances at that time were unthinkable, and somehow he came through it. I admire and love him. He was a hardworking, brilliant, and loving man. He will always be my Grandpa Bob, which is what he was called. Okay, just a few more. From my cousin Lynn, who lives in Connecticut, who couldn't come. She's my father's youngest sister's daughter. My Uncle Bob. For as long as I can remember, I've had an Uncle Bob. Although I didn't see him much, I knew he was my family and my mother's brother, and therefore special. My memories of him are always wrapped in kindness, because he always seemed quiet and gentle in his interactions with me. A man of few words, and yet I realized early on that he was a very intelligent man in so many areas of life. Of course, I realized that my mother was very fond of her big brother, and I'm sure that added to my feelings. Over the years, his never-ending, subtle support was always evident, quietly there in the background, but we all knew he was available if we needed him. He was a source of comfort to my mom, and I am sure they shared many conversations in regard to their children's sometimes complicated lives, as only a brother and sister can do. After my mom passed, so that's my dad's youngest sister, died very suddenly a few years ago. And that's who Lynn is referring to. After my mom passed, he once again was present with his wise and wonderful suggestions. I trusted his guidance and welcomed his input. From that time on, I was fortunate enough to have been able to keep in contact through mail, and yes, even several conversations. I cherish them all and feel we had an unspoken bond, each respecting our own ways of communicating and expressing our deepest feelings. Were it not for my complete and unwavering belief that he is with the rest of the family, I would be devastated. However, in my realm, he is happy and whole. I get to honor his memory all the while knowing his spirit will always be present. He was and is an inspiration to all who knew him. That's my cousin Lynn, who's 8 years younger than I am, and she and I have become great friends. Two more. One from Eric and one from his Chinese girlfriend Lynn in China, dated yesterday. Eric wrote, as a child, the longest period I spent with Grammy and Grandpa was the summer I went up to Cape Cod with them for 5 weeks when I was 5 years old. It was a road trip. The highlight of the 3-day car trip from South Carolina to Massachusetts was, for me, the sight of Grandpa's hair after dealing with car trouble on the side of the road during a wind and rainstorm. I'm not sure whether it bore a closer resemblance to Mozart or Einstein. Anyway, by the second day after we had arrived at the Cape, Grandpa, engineer that he was, had put together a detailed agenda for my visit. It was pretty impressive, well thought out and age appropriate. The first matter of business was getting a bicycle. Honestly, I think Eric is misremembering because I don't think he learned to ride a bike till he was about 9. Maybe it was a tricycle, it doesn't matter. He's not here. A bicycle procured through bargaining with a guy he somehow found in the Yellow Pages, who rebuilt bikes from scrap parts. The bicycle allowed me to roam around the neighborhood a little bit, as well as to enjoy some of the Cape's bike trails. Other items on the list included beach trips, Cape Cod Summer League baseball games, an outdoor Tchaikovsky concert, which blew my mind as a result of the cannons during the 1812 overture, And projects. With Grandpa, there were always projects. Weeds to pull, rocks to remove, walls to paint, hammocks to hang, squirrels to deter. I'm glad Eric wasn't holding on to that wire when walls to paint, hammocks to hang, squirrels to deter, walkways to lay. And as a reward for our hard work, he introduced me to one of my favorite things, the Sunday school in Brewster. Black cherry, rum raisin, and marshmallow fluff. Oy vey, he says. Grandpa always made time for food. And when I was reflecting over my memories of him, food came up often. He loved Clemson University's ice cream. He introduced me to the joys of peanut M&Ms, cans of Coke in the fridge, matzah, and if you don't know what matzah is, ask, wheat thins, Triscuits, Chex Mix, grape nuts, and really fresh squeezed orange juice and grapefruit from Hale's Orchards in Vero Beach, Florida. He was never much of a drinker, but he made a mean bottle of beach plum liqueur that he kept in the cabinet. He learned how to do that with vodka and fruit and sugar. As a child, I was allergic to clams, and once I outgrew the allergy, it took a little time for the texture to grow on me, but I always loved the trips to Nickerson's Fish Market in Chatham to pick up a bushel of steamers. And the smell of steamed clams, clarified butter, and Sam Adams beer on the porch at the Cape. By that time, Eric was old enough to drink a beer. Grandpa and I didn't see eye to eye on everything. For example, while we both enjoyed going to Dodger Town, which was the Los Angeles Dodgers spring training at the time down in Vero Beach, he preferred to leave the games in the 6th inning to beat the traffic. You don't leave in the 6th inning of a baseball game. Also, in spite of my growing up in a neighborhood, he grew up in Kiowiki, with an 18-hole golf course, and Harry and I don't play, Grandpa was unsuccessful in passing on to me his passion for the game. When I was in high school, one of my best friends was very impressed after meeting Grandpa and said with wide-eyed sincerity, "Your grandfather's cool." I agree, but I think Grandpa was cool not in keeping up with trends, but rather quite the opposite, more of a kind of aloof cool. You'd be hard-pressed to find a photo in which Grandpa's smiling, and believe me, I found the few that there are. He had a great smile, but he just didn't do poses. Likewise, his response to, "I love you, Grandpa," was typically a nod and maybe a half-mumbled, "Thank you." I didn't mind, though. I could see his love in his eyes and his actions. He was a funny guy, and a lot of funny people have difficulty expressing emotion, and Grandpa fell into that category. Everyone who ever met him remembers his jokes and his quips that he always had ready, even after coming out of surgery. It feels strange to me to be so far away at this time. But in the end, I got to see Grandpa far more times and far longer than I had dared hope for. It was great that he was in pretty good shape and spirits at the time I had to go back to China a few weeks ago. I feel deeply grateful for that time together, and especially for the opportunity I had to introduce him several times to my girlfriend Lynn, with whom I hope to share a future. Harry and I have been waiting to hear a phrase like that for 5 years. She'll share her impressions of him in her own words from the 3 times she was able to visit the U.S. I'm also very grateful for all the support and friendship you all have given my parents in my absence, and that my cousins Jimmy and David are there. I wish I were there with you. My thoughts are there, though, and Grandpa is here in my heart. One more, and this is from our darling Lynn, who writes, Grandpa, which of course she called him because that's what Eric called him. Grandpa was a very, very charming man. He was happy, nice, knowledgeable, funny, and positive. We talked about food, his experiences in Hong Kong and Taiwan, the differences between American and Chinese families, his excellent golf skills. He never told me he was excellent. He was a great joke teller, although it was difficult for me to understand them sometimes. He and I both love eating very much. He loved eating sweet stuff. When Eric and I were back in the States, each of the last 3 years, he liked to invite me to his place to share extremely sweet cookies, probably something Bill made, who knows, and ice cream, which always made me put on weight during those months. Yeah, she probably weighs 90 pounds now. He was easygoing and brave, willing to try new things like the snacks I brought him from China. Every time we showed him a picture or told him about some exotic thing from China, he never turned up his nose. He always thought it was great. Interesting. That was him. What a charming man. He charmed me, and he will keep charming others on the other side. Wo ai ni. How am I doing with that, Sharon? Wo ai ni, which means I love you in Chinese, the only Chinese phrase he knew, but he remembered it. So it's been long. But these people who couldn't be here deserve to have a voice. And at this point, I wish to invite anyone who would like to come up and say anything they would like about my father. And I'll rest my feet for a couple of minutes. Anybody ready? John Whitmer?
I just want to say a word or two because I just couldn't miss the opportunity to say something about my friend Bob. Boy, that was such a great expression. You know, Harry kind of stole some of the words away from me that I was going to use, but
You need to use the mic. 'cause
Bob
we
was-
record it, okay?
Bob was above all a human being in the classic sense of the word, and Harry used the phrase, a real mensch. He had this intellectual curiosity that overcame everything else. He wouldn't put up with just well, I assume so and so. Well, what do you base that on? What is your feeling for this? You know, we did not share his passion for golf, but we did share his passion for political economics. I use that term very advisedly because, as some of you know, we have rather strong views on this subject, and Bob was most appreciative when I passed on some economic experts' analysis of a current problem of the day. And but the thing about it is that Bob was such a warm human being that he never imposed his political views on anybody else. Probably many of you don't even know what his political views were because he felt that this was something that was private. You know, Bob was a real lover of old movies. One of his most favorite movies was a film called The Bucket.
Bucket list.
The Bucket Wish.
Bucket list.
And I asked him several times what was in. Do you know what a bucket wish is? This is the place where you put all those dreams of things you want to, those dreams of things that you want to accomplish before you pass on. And he thought it was such a wonderful idea. When I asked him about what was in his bucket wish, he always evaded the question. Always evaded the question because I guess it was a little bit too personal. And as much as he was a warm human being, he was a very private person as well. And these are kinds of things that he kind of kept to himself. But moving on to the things that he enjoyed sharing with others, he enjoyed a good laugh. His humor was subtle, but it was real. And one of the most proud things that I can say in the short time that I knew Bob was, I enjoyed meeting him as a friend. My life is richer for having known him. Thank you.
Thank you. John and Glenn Scales, who slipped out early, shared a table in the dining room, and I invited myself to lunch many times, and I'll continue to, because I like you people, and Dad did too. anyone else choose to say anything? Andy, all right, you got to come up and use the microphone because it's being filmed. When I was in Toastmasters, I was taught you never leave the lectern unattended. You make sure someone comes and gets it.
Okay, so, I am Andy Nelson, and I'm a newer friend of Linda's. Most of her friends she has known for 200 or 300 years. Mine's more like 2 or 3, but a couple of years ago, maybe not quite that, it was spring, and I was out back trying to get my lawnmower started. And Linda and her dad happened to drop by, and I just could not pull that string to make the thing work, and I was so aggravated, and went to the car, and I'm whining about it, and he said, well, let me take a look at it. Now, you've already heard about Bob the engineer and, trying to figure out how things work. So now he was only 94 at the time. Keep that in mind. And he comes out back and he very professionally checks the gas, and the oil and other things. I have no idea what. And then he finally stepped aside and he said, okay, now you say a brucha. Okay, a brucha is a prayer. It's a Hebrew word for prayer, but it was so ironic because here he had done all these very scientific things, to get this mower started, and then it was like, now it's up to you. And I still couldn't get it started. He was a great guy.
Thank you, Andy. And it's uncharacteristic, except that he knows that Andy grew up Jewish, so she would know what this word was. But I love that you point out science and faith. Very important. Anybody else wish to say anything? Julia Wise, please come up. And I'll come. Yeah, arms, right? Your other legs, whatever. See, I missed this. I have to put myself to use somehow. This is, okay, the mic is ready for you, Julia.
Hello, everyone. Bob and I cared for our loved ones for many years in the nursing home. And every day he was there from 9 until 6. And every day I would see him and I would wonder, why doesn't that man ever smile? And one day he was sitting outside and I sat down and he said, excuse me, why don't you ever smile? And so we became very, very good friends. And I admired him so much, and he set such an example for everyone over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you. As did you. As did you. I'm so glad you could get here today. Dorothy Jones. Ms. Dot, please come. The lectern is yours.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that Bob was a faithful volunteer here at Clemson Downs. I met him through Miss Allison. I used to sit and listen to her talk. She had so many educational stories to tell that I just grasped. But she told me some secrets too. So one day I said to him, I said, nanny, nanny, boo, boo. Miss Allison been telling some secrets, nanny, nanny, boo, boo. So he looked at me and he said, I know some secrets too. Cool, 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 cool. So we just, he was a kind, considerate person. Even he could communicate communicate with me. And like I said, he was a very faithful volunteer, and he brought joy to people that walked through the to the health center the time that he was there, and we enjoyed him very much, and we will always remember him. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Dr. John LaHoop, who is the head honcho of Clemson Downs. The lectern is yours, sir.
Thank you. The reason Bob didn't smile very much is because he was thinking. The reason I don't smile very much is because I'm always thinking. If I'm smiling, I'm not thinking. Bob was my friend. He would come to me and say, "The problem is." And the thing of it is when he would bring things to me, it was because he cared. If he didn't care, he wouldn't come to me and make suggestions. And he was also my putting partner, my buddy. He was competitive to the end. He loved to win in his putting and would be practicing all the time and would give me suggestions because I'm not a golfer. I'm not a putter either, but towards the end, when he was not very stable, I said, "Bob, you show up and I'll hold you up and make sure that you finish that game." And he would probably beat me anyway. In a community like this, there are many personalities. There are people that smile all the time. There are people that hardly smile at all. There are people that are happy all the time, and there are people that aren't. But each one is a special jewel in our treasure chest. And it is my blessing to be part of that community that at the end of life, I am able to get close to different people, to see them at their best and worst, and to share lives together. And being a Presbyterian minister, I am taught that we are to store up treasures in heaven. And those treasures in heaven are the treasures that we make on earth. Those are relationships. So those are the friendships and the love that we share with one another. And that is one thing that we can take from this dimension into the next, the love we share with one another. Bob and I shared love with one another. We spent time with one another, and it is a blessing to me to be at this event, to share time with you. Thank you.
We may have time for one more, or, oh, Bill, come on up. And we're rounding up on 3 o'clock, and that seems like an appropriate hour to close.
Well, Linda, you did a marvelous job, and we appreciate it. Just one brief story to give you an idea of Bob's generosity and his determination. A few years ago, there was a couple that actually celebrated in this room their 80th wedding anniversary. And Bob was very much a good friend of both, and he was determined that the gentleman should be honored. And so he went through many channels to try to get a certificate of appreciation from the University of Indiana. And he phoned, he wrote, he called back when needed, spent weeks on this, and finally, days before the celebration came about, Bob had that certificate and presented it to the gentleman, which of course meant so much to both of them.
Tell their names, because a lot of people don't know who they are.
Martha and Mendel Sherman. I can only say what all of you already know, that Bob was an honest, kind-hearted man and a wonderful friend.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate this so much. At this time, I would like to invite Reverend Bailoff forward, and she will close out our celebration. And before she speaks, I want to remind you that there are lots of cookies and lemonade, little Snickers bars, and for any of you who are the putters, my dad's golf balls that I found. Please take one. If you're the Friday morning putting group, please take one of my dad's golf balls. It will.
That way
it
you
would make
don't have to find something.
I won't have to take up golf. I won't have to take up golf. Thank you.
How blessed we have all been to have known Bob, and blessed we are for all the wonderful love and values that he passed on to his children and that they have passed on to theirs. Let us join our hearts and minds in a short prayer from the gates of repentance. O source of peace, lead us to peace, a peace that is profound and true. Lead us to a healing, a mastery of all that drives us to war within ourselves and with others. May our deeds inscribe us in the book of life and blessing, righteousness and peace. O source of peace, bless us with peace. Amen. So as we leave this place, may we live in such a way that we too find peace in our hearts and peace among those whose lives we touch. May we seek joy in living. May we love deeply and live each moment as a blessing. In this way, we will honor and celebrate the life of Robert Paul Brody. Go in love and go in peace. Amen.
The music back on if you want, and I invite everyone to go through that door, turn right, wet your whistle, have a Snickers. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. I hope you all signed the guest book.
That was very good. Yeah.